Hello, Craig Hutchison here. Welcome to my strategic planning masterclass. Well, we finally got here. We finally got to the module where you actually start talking about your strategy. What are you going to do over the short to medium term? I say that it's probably about 3 to 5 years, depending again on your organization. So yes, this is the eighth module. We've spent 7 modules in the planning and the foundation work and the diagnosis and battlegrounds. But trust me, it's been worthwhile doing your homework, and it'll pay off many, many times, because now you and your team will have the knowledge, will have the capability to actually put together your strategy. So, how do you go about doing that? Well, I like using the term strategic pillars or strategic thrusts, or these are the big areas that you want to now focus on based on your diagnosis and your battlegrounds and ambitions within those battlegrounds. Now you can identify, you know, say 5, maybe it's less, maybe it's 1 or 2 more. Don't go for too many of these major strategic pillars, areas that you are going to be focusing on over your strategic planning period. If you choose too many, you won't have the resources to be able to execute. If you choose too few, you may be missing a trick. So make sure you have the right number of strategic pillars. Now, these can be both externally focused, right? About your driving your sales and or improving your marketing, or internally, similar to what you found within your battlegrounds. And you'll actually see in the next slide that you should link your strategic pillars to your battlegrounds. Some classic questions that you can ask yourself or challenge yourself when thinking about what your strategic pillars are are you looking at market or product expansion? Okay. And here's a model that has been around for many, many years, simple Foursquare, where you're currently in the top left block, where with your existing products and existing markets, you could try and get further penetration. Okay, you could try and increase your market share through better route to market or better marketing, being more effective. Or indeed, you could develop more products, you could innovate, all right, and have a wider portfolio and move to the right, the new product or product development square. Or indeed, you could go into new markets, you could expand geographically, or within your geography, you could look at other customers. So you could develop your market. And the riskiest or the most difficult strategy is to diversify, to go for both new products and new markets. So that's a classic, and you could debate and brainstorm using that as a framework. Within that, yes, as I said, you can look at more customers or sell more to current customers. You could think about franchising, or do you want to grow organically? And there's pros and cons to either approach. Do you need to innovate? If you've been following all my modules, I think this is you'll understand my point of view, which is this is absolutely essential. We need to build agile teams, always ready to change, always ready to innovate. Focus on current or new markets or products. I've covered that. Marketing mix decisions. Your 5 Ps. Is it working for you? Maybe you need to tweak some of the areas within your marketing mix. What about your resources? Do you have enough? Most of the time, people say we don't have enough. It is limited. Maybe you need to allocate your resources in a different way and really put your resources behind priority projects. What about financing? Do you need to take on more debt? Do you need more equity? Do you have working capital constraints? Is this inhibiting your growth? Okay, so you need to talk and debate to see whether any of these are major issues. So again, it's a brainstorming session. Perhaps it could just be one workshop where you will be able to very much identify what your strategic pillars are, and in fact, I think that should be the case, because if I take you to the next slide, you can see here in the previous module we discussed the battlegrounds and ambition. So you already have that. That's already been brainstormed. summarized, and probably even presented. And following from that, you have your strategic pillar. So you see the red line that links the strategic pillar back through to your battleground, and then your ambition, and then what your strategy is within that battleground. So you should be able to accomplish this in 1 or 2 workshops. Perhaps then, after you've summarized it and put it down on a slide or on some kind of white paper and circulated it, it may need some tweaking. People may need to think about it for a while, but generally speaking, you'll have a good feel whether you've nailed the strategies in kind of the wider sense, in terms of strategic pillar or strategic thrust. This, however, is just the start. You now need to take that strategic pillar and deconstruct it, break it down into various projects, maybe 1 or 2 projects, maybe 8 or 10 projects. It really depends on how big the strategy is, what you're trying to achieve, and how much resource you have. There's no point in coming up with hundreds of projects if you don't actually have the resource to deliver on those projects. Now, make sure you set decent KPIs for delivering these projects. Make sure you've got a delivery date, and make sure you know exactly what you want to achieve behind these key strategic projects. So my view in this, as the slide says, is set SMART KPIs for each strategic project. You remember SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, results, and time bound. If you'll be able to find this acronym in many places. Just Google it. But I've used this many times. It's absolutely essential that you get SMART KPIs. And then for each project, there must be an owner, okay, a sponsor who is responsible for delivery, and if the project is big enough, a project manager as well, and a steering committee, and use proper professional project management techniques. Okay, make sure they're reported on a regular basis. Make sure the project manager is doing a good job. Make sure the sponsor is taking responsibility. Remember, great line, I use it often, what gets measured gets managed. What gets measured gets managed. Right, at this stage, you're probably also thinking, what does my business look like? What does my industry look like? You've done all the work, you've got all the knowledge there. Now it's a case of actually looking at some numbers, finally got to some quantitative side of the planning process. So it's looking at your forecast. Again, it could be a 3-year or a 5-year forecast. Look at what your industry is doing. Look at your industry growth. Okay. Look at your ambitions. You've covered your ambitions. What are your market share ambitions within that forecast? Factor in things like product or market expansion, right? How do you expect to grow, right? What are your strategies? And look at potential innovation, all right? And you need to commit. You need to commit to whatever your market share ambitions are. Adjust in your P&L for any price changes that you want to put through, or that you think you may have to put through in response. Any cost of goods, any increase in advertising promotion, potentially any structural cost changes. Now, I quite like doing a P&L forecast, both on the top down, back of an envelope, and then marrying that with a more detailed bottom up, and then comparing the two, reconciling them, and sometimes the one flags up issues with the other. Generally speaking, you want them to agree. Generally speaking, they do agree if you've made the right assumptions. Folks, I've seen crazy forecasts over the years. Be realistic. Watch out for the old hockey stick plan, constant growth for the first few years, and then all of a sudden, amazing growth towards the end of the plan. Okay, that tends to never work out in reality. So a good way of avoiding this is run a number of scenarios. There's some great tools for running scenarios. Have a realistic scenario, a pessimistic and an optimistic scenario. And if you use Excel or other tools, flexing these assumptions is rather easy. You can change a few of your metrics and see how that pans out over the course of the plan. And this 3 to 5 year forecast actually then becomes the basis for your annual budget. So you're actually killing two birds with one stone. After you've completed the forecast, you've actually got your annual budget in place that you can use, for obviously for budgeting purposes, and then for resetting your estimates throughout the year. Okay, so that's the end of the establishing strategy module. Thinking about strategic pillars, the projects within those pillars, setting smart KPIs, and also your forecast. Hopefully that makes sense. As ever, drop me a line if you'd like me to explain something in more detail. And see you next time, where we're finalizing. We're coming to the end of this strategic planning masterclass, where we're looking at how to finalize, communicate, and execute your strategic plan. See you then.